Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're digging into a question that has shaped global policy for decades and looking at some new research that really challenges one of our most basic beliefs about how to help the world's poorest people.
For years, the answer seemed, obvious, right? A clear and simple yes. But as we're about to see, a groundbreaking study reveals a much more complicated and, frankly, a much more dangerous picture. It suggests the very engine we use to lift people out of poverty might actually be setting a trap for them instead.
The established wisdom, backed by huge studies from places like the World Bank, was that a rising economic tide lifts all boats. The core idea was pretty simple. As a country gets richer on average, everyone benefits, even the people at the very bottom.
Okay, so let's dive into this. First, we need to really understand that traditional argument that has guided our global approach to poverty for so long.
This idea, summed up perfectly in a hugely influential 2002 study, is refreshingly simple. As a country's average income goes up, the incomes of the poorest 20% tend to go up right along with it. This became the bedrock of development policy. Just focus on growth and poverty reduction will take care of itself.
But, and this is a huge but, this simple story leaves out two massive complications. The new research we're looking at today says these aren't just little side effects. They are powerful forces that cast these long, dark shadows over the whole promise of economic growth.
And here's the problem in a nutshell. The promise is that growth is going to reduce poverty, but the shadows tell a different story. The carbon-heavy ways we often get that growth pollute our climate, and that same growth very often makes the gap between the rich and the poor even wider.
This creates a huge tension right at the heart of something like the UN Sustainable Development Goals. How do you chase goal number 8, economic growth, to solve goal number 1, no poverty, if that very same growth makes goal number 10, inequality, and goal number 13, climate change, even worse? It really seems like these goals might be pulling in opposite directions.
So here's the crucial point. These things don't just exist side by side. The research shows they actually interact in this powerful and often destructive way, creating what the authors call the growth inequality emissions triangle.
Okay, let's walk through this vicious cycle, because this is at the core of the research. You start with growth, and yeah, it can help the poor directly, but it also creates these two negative forces, emissions and inequality. Now here's the kicker. The study finds that when those two forces combine, they can actually overwhelm the good stuff from the growth, literally trapping people in poverty.
Let's be really clear on what a poverty trap is. It means poverty isn't just about a lack of money. It becomes a system, a self-reinforcing cycle that actively keeps people poor. And this research shows how our go-to growth strategies can accidentally make the walls of that trap even stronger. And here's the real twist in the research. It's not just the emissions, and it's not just the inequality. It's the two working together. The study shows that climate change, driven by emissions, hits the absolute hardest in places where society is already unfair. It's a toxic combination that means the most vulnerable people, who, by the way, contribute the least to the problem, suffer the worst effects, locking them into poverty.
Another really powerful finding from this research is just how persistent poverty is. The study shows that a country's poverty level in the past is a massive predictor of its poverty level today. It's sticky. It hangs around.
On average, across all the countries they studied, almost 70% of today's poverty is just a continuation of yesterday's poverty. That number just shows you how powerful that self-reinforcing poverty trap really is, and how incredibly hard it is to break free. Okay, so now let's see how this trap creates a totally different reality for high-income countries versus low-income countries, because this whole dynamic is not the same everywhere. Just look at this table. It lays out the difference so starkly. For rich countries, the main thing holding back poverty reduction is income inequality. But for low-income countries, it's that devastating double threat: emissions plus inequality. And then look at the poverty trap risk. It's just so much higher in poorer nations.
This is so important. That vicious feedback loop we talked about, it's supercharged in the very nations that are least equipped to handle it. Their path out of poverty is literally being blocked by the combined forces of climate change and social inequity.
Just take a moment and look at that number, 84%. In low-income countries, that's how much of today's poverty is just a continuation of yesterday's. This makes it crystal clear why a one-size-fits-all approach to development doesn't just fail to help, it can actively reinforce this devastating cycle, making the trap even harder to escape. So what does this all mean for how we approach fighting poverty and climate change on a global scale? I mean, if our old models are this flawed, what comes next?
The research sends a really powerful warning. Applying the same rules for emissions cuts or development plans to everyone, rich and poor alike, isn't just ineffective, it's unjust. It could actually make poverty and inequality worse in the places where it's already the most severe.
So what's the path forward? Well, first, policymakers have got to recognize that these three issues, growth, inequality, and emissions, are inseparable. You can't fix one in a vacuum. Second, fighting inequality has to be seen as a core climate policy and a core poverty policy. And finally, low-income countries need what the paper calls developmental space, basically the room to grow their economies and lift people from poverty without being trapped by the very system that created the climate crisis in the first place.
And that leaves us with a final, really provocative thought. For decades, we've focused on growth as the answer to poverty. This research challenges us to completely flip our priorities, suggesting that building fairer, more equal societies isn't just some nice social goal, it might just be the single most powerful climate action we can take.